Hi, thank you for joining us for Census 2020. What is the census? My name is Lindsay Marsh. I am with the National Community Action Partnership, and today we're going to talk through some of the basics about what the census is, where it came from, and what we do every 10 years in this nation. Let's get started. So the census is actually codified in the Constitution. It is in Article 1, Section 2, so it's pretty early in the Constitution. But it was a way for our founding fathers to figure out how each state would contribute to the bottom line of our nation. Originally, they used it in part to distribute debt from the Revolutionary War, but they also used it they currently use it to distribute wealth among the states. Every 10 years, we count all people who live in the United States. Regardless of their status, we count immigrants, we count undocumented immigrants, we count diplomats, we count asylum seekers, we count foreign exchange students who are staying in the States for 6 months if they live here over April 1st of 2020. No matter who you are, if you live in the United States, you should be counted. It's the way our founding fathers designed the census in our Constitution. And we have been doing this way since the year 1790. There's a lot of misinformation about what the questions are that are on the census. So we've created a slide that shows you exactly what those questions are. This is it. It is simply age. They're going to ask how old you are and what year you were born. And they will ask that of every member of your household. They will ask Hispanic origin and race. For race, you can mark one or more boxes on the form, and then they're asking you to print origins. So if you, for example, hit white, like I would, under origin, I would put Germany and England because my family comes from Germany and England. Relationship is the next question. They want to know how each of the people in the household are interrelated. So they use person one as the touchstone, and each person is asked how they're related to that person. Gender, male or female, is asked, and then they ask if you own or rent this house, apartment, or mobile home. So they want to know what kind of a domicile you live in, and if you're an owner or a renter. That's it as far as demographic questions are concerned. This is really the meat of what the census asks. There are a few operational questions. They ask how many people lived here on April 1st. This is in part to catch people who might not otherwise be included on that form. If somebody is just staying with you, are they living with you? Well, if they don't have another place to call home, then yes, they are. So if you have a couch surfing friend, for example, who is staying with you because they don't have anywhere else to live, then you should count them on your census form. If you have a newborn baby who is new to the household or maybe was just born and is still in the hospital, but they will live in your home when they come home from the hospital as a newborn, you would include that baby. Children 0 to 4 and 5 to 9 are the two most often overlooked groups in the country because people don't realize that babies and children count as well. So these are the operational questions. How many people live here? Were additional people staying here? And they want the telephone number and the name of the person filling out the census. So if they have questions about what you've put on your form, they know who to reach out to get clarification. That's what the census will ask. There are also several things that the census won't ask. For starters, they will never ask for your social security number. It is not on the form. They will never ask for bank or credit card information. They are not trying to take a payment from you. They're not asking for donations. They're not asking for citizenship status. They're not asking anything political, and they're not asking household income. Some of those questions, mostly household income, are found on the American Community Survey, which has been done since 2005, and it's done on a rolling basis. So 1% of American households gets the American Community Service every year. No household gets that survey more than once every 5 years, but it is a way that's a better way for the Census Bureau to collect more in-depth information about the American population that doesn't tie into the decennial census anymore. So those 10 questions that I just went over, and none of these will be on that census form. Very short, very quick. If you spend 10 minutes, you're good for 10 years. Once they collect this data, what is it used for? The biggest thing, there are two biggest things. The first biggest thing is apportionment. They take everyone in the United States, they count all the people who live in this country, and they divide that number by 435. That's the number of congressional seats in the House of Representatives in our federal Congress. Once they figure out how many people are in each of those 435 districts by taking the total population and dividing it by 435, they then go through each state and they allot a representative for each number of people throughout the country. Right now, the number per district is around 720,000 people. The new number is estimated to be around 810,000 people per district. There are some states that do not have 810,000 people living in them, like Wyoming, Vermont. They're small states, Delaware. Those states are automatically allotted one congressional seat. The rest of the country is divvied up by those 810,000 person chunks. So for example, in 2010, going into the 2010 census, Pennsylvania had 19 congressional seats. After the census, it was determined that population had shifted and Pennsylvania only had enough people living in the state to qualify for 18 congressional seats. And this brings us to the next thing that census data is used for. When they lost a congressional seat, Pennsylvania had to redraw the remaining 18 seats to cover the entire state. So the members of that 19th congressional district were absorbed into the other 18 districts, so everyone in Pennsylvania had a congressional representative. That redistricting process will begin in 2021, and it will be not just for federal races, but it'll also impact your state house and state senate races. It'll impact your voting districts and your school districts. If you have an area that has grown in residential housing in the last 10 years and they have a lot of children in that area, the local government might choose to redraw some of the school boundary lines to make sure that one school doesn't sit half empty while the school across the boundary line is overflowing and overly full because of the population shifts. This happens with school districts and voting precincts to make sure that all of your voting precincts don't have lines wrapping around the block for hours and hours when you go to vote. So apportionment and redrawing congressional districts and that political power is one thing that census data is used for. The other thing is to distribute federal dollars to states. Many people don't realize that federal funding to states is based on formulas that include census data. LIHEAP is a really great example of this. Somewhere buried in between the old formula and the new formula for LIHEAP is current census numbers. So the number of people that you report in your area by having them fill out the census impacts the kind of funding that you get for the programs that our agencies manage and work with every day. Census data is also used to inform government planning at the federal, state, tribal, and local levels. So this means that we use census data to decide where the next hospital in town will go, or if we need a fire station. It will also determine, in part, where we direct funding pots. So highway transportation dollars. If Oklahoma City has seen a huge increase in population between one suburban outlet and downtown, it might mean that that little section of highway requires and needs more attention and more highway resources because more people are traveling on it every day. That kind of stuff can be informed by census numbers. Organizational decisions, where do you put nonprofits? Where do you put businesses? If you see an uptick in homeless population in one area of town, the city might decide to encourage a nonprofit to start a homeless shelter in that area. It also means that places where those kids are popping up in a residential area might get an extra ice cream store because there might be demand for that. The final thing that census data is used for on this list is to enforce voting rights and civil rights legislation. This is why they ask for Hispanic origin, and this is why they ask for race. They need to make sure that we can direct voting rights and civil rights legislation monies to the areas in this country where they're needed the most. This is not an exhaustive list of what census data is used for. In fact, it permeates pretty much all of American society, and I call it a basic building block of democracy. We use it as community action because we do our community needs assessments every 3 years, and we use census numbers to inform those decisions. So having an accurate count is really crucial for us, because if we use census data numbers that aren't necessarily accurate to project the next 3 years of what our agencies are going to do, and they're inaccurate, we're not serving our communities to the best of our ability. So when does the census start? Invitations go out between March 12th and March 20th. So in that 8-day period, every household in this country should receive, at a bare minimum, an invitation to respond online to the census. This year, the major change in how we're filling out the census is that we're pushing people to go online. These invitations will have a unique code that you plug in when you go to the census website, which is www.my2020census.gov. You plug in that code and then you access your survey. Once you finish that survey, you cannot use the code to reopen your survey and make edits and changes. If, for example, you forget somebody, or if you fill out the census before April 1st, and somebody adds, you have an addition to your household between the time you fill out the census and April 1st, you can go back online and you can fill out the form without using that ID and add an additional person to your household. So you can now fill out the census online. In fact, we encourage people to do it that way. But we also have added a second option with phones. So the phone lines used to be for questions only, and now they're not only for questions, but they're also able to take survey responses over the phone. So a census operator can guide you through that process. Online, the census is translated into 59 different languages. On the phones, they will have 13 different languages in live bodies. So real humans speaking those tongues in those 13 languages. March 16th through April 3rd, reminder letters and postcards will be sent to households across America, reminding you to look for the form. It will have your unique code on it, again, in case you lost the first mailing. And again, I want to reiterate, you can do that survey online without that unique code if you need to, because you've lost the code, or if you need to update and add somebody to your survey. You cannot take anybody away from your survey, but you can add people if you've forgotten somebody. April 1st is this magic census day. It is the day that I call a snapshot of America. No matter when you fill out your form, if it's March 12th when you first get your form, or if it is July 31st, which is the last day that you can possibly fill out your form, it doesn't matter what's happening in your household that day. You always think about what happened in your household or what will happen in your household on April 1st. So that if you are having a baby and that baby is born on April 5th, you shouldn't include that baby in your census form, technically, because the baby did not live in that household on April 1st because they hadn't yet been born. So if you are expecting a baby, you might not want to fill out the form until after the baby's born, so you know whether or not you should include them on your form. April 8th through April 16th, reminder letters will be sent with paper questionnaires. This is the first time that the majority of households in America will receive the traditional paper form. They are trying to only send it to people who have not yet responded to the census by April 8th. There are some people who will get paper questionnaires in March with their initial survey invitations, and those are usually households where internet access is spotty or unreliable or non-existent, or where they know that paper questionnaires will be a more effective means of getting participation than in other areas. And further along in our Train the Trainer, we will address a lot of that issue, those issues. April 20th through April 27th, final postcards will be sent before they start in-person follow-up. In-person follow-up is called non-response follow-up, NARFU. Starting on May 4th through July 24th, census enumerators come to the doors of houses that have not yet responded to the census and knock on the door and say, hey, we are here to fill out your survey and talk to you about the census. And they will conduct the survey in person from your front porch, face to face. So I mentioned that some people will get forms, paper forms automatically, and some people will get just online invitations to go call the hotlines or to go online to my2020census.gov. There's a later segment in our Train the Trainer that goes over the CNY Maps, which is the City University of New York, and the Census Bureau's Rome Maps. The CNY Map has an overlay that shows you how people will get some of those invitations. Will they get them in English? Will they get them in Spanish? Will they get bilingual forms? Will they get paper forms initially, or will they simply be pushed to online or phone response options? These maps also show where some areas might have internet disadvantages, where some people might have literacy issues or English issues, seeking as a language or not at all. These maps have a very detailed look at each census tract, so each little pocket of America, to see what their census story is. If somebody doesn't get an invitation, which is entirely possible, especially among our populations where people tend to move quite a bit, we have a very mobile population among community action. People might end up living in somebody's basement for a few weeks and then moving to a motel and then moving in with a parent for a few weeks. If they don't get an invitation, they can and should still fill out the form with whatever address they think they're going to live at on April 1st. So if they're staying with a family member and they're not sure that they're going to be moving or not, but they're going to be in the same area, they can fill out that form prior to April 1st using the best guess that they have as to where they will be. They can call the toll-free numbers or they can go online to complete their census form. Okay, sorry, I thought I skipped a slide and I didn't. So let's talk about the environment of the 2020 census and why it's a big deal and why it's been complicated. The census environment has changed drastically over the last 50 years. In 1970, it cost about $16 to count each household in America. Today, it costs about $107 per household. And these are a lot of the reasons why that is. A, we have a mobile population, which we've already talked about. We also have informal, complex living arrangements. We have grandparents taking care of grandchildren. We have people who are not related and not in a relationship sharing households. The rising cost of housing in this country nationwide is causing more people to not live in familial units and to have non-related folks. You have roommate situations with 2 or 3 or 4 roommates in an apartment building. Lots of those informal complex living arrangements make this a challenge. We have an increasingly diverse population where we have people immigrating from all over the world to the United States. Many of them have never heard of the census. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it does. And in their own home country, they might never be willing to say the kinds of things that we're asking for on our census forms to their government, which is understandable. We are not those countries, though, and I will go into why it's safe, not only easy and important, but also safe in later presentations. Declining response rates are due to all of these factors, including distrust in government. Today's political environment is not helping the census efforts at all. The addition of the attempted addition of the citizenship question last summer made the census very partisan in ways that we have not seen before. And that has sown a lot of fear and mistrust and unease about the process with the very populations that are most likely to be undercounted. We also have an information explosion and combined with a rapidly changing use of technology, that causes a problem. If if we can't cut through the clutter to tell people that they need to fill out the census and why it's important and why it is safe and why it is easy and how to do it, then we're having trouble getting out of the starting gate. So we have to cut through all that clutter. People now carry smart computers in the palm of their hands that buzz and beep and have multiple email address inboxes on their phones with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, plus text messages, news alerts. People are really busy and overwhelmed with information. So we have to cut through all of that to get them the message that the census is safe, easy, and important. The census hires hundreds of thousands of people a cycle and will spend $15 billion to complete the count. That's a lot of money. This is the biggest ground operation and actually the biggest undertaking, the biggest undertaking in America outside of military operations for our country. The important thing here, I've already talked about the $16 versus the $107, but the important part here is that every person counted in America is equal to about for your community every year for 10 years. So one person can be worth $20,000 in federal program funding for your community over the next decade, but only if we count them. Why community action? So why are we engaged in this way? I think I've hit on some of these points already. Populations that are the most difficult to reach and to convince to participate and are least likely to fill out that form walk through our doors every day. That's why we're involved. We help these folks when they need help. They come to us in their darkest hour of need and we help them. And that means that we are trusted messengers and we can raise the issue of the census with them and explain the merits of doing the form. The populations we serve that are most undercounted deserve fair representation and their fair share of dollars. And that's what we're working towards here. The census has identified these groups as the hardest to count in the country. And if you look at this, it's a veritable who's who of community action. People of color, people who don't have constant or consistent internet access, people who have recently returned from abroad, people with disabilities, people who have low literacy rates, homeless folks, Native Americans, people with low income, people who move a lot. All of these folks are the people we help on a daily basis. So a little bit more about the dollars that we gain from the census programs. Every single community action agency has CSBG funding. It might only be 3 or 5% of an agency's budget, but it is 100% of their identity. And all of that funding is based in census dollars, census numbers that translate into dollars. I already mentioned LIHEAP. Census numbers are baked into the new formula, the old formula. Head Start dollars are tied to census numbers. Healthcare centers, WIOA activities, rural rental assistance programs, programs for the aging, all of these things, Section 8 housing, is part of the $864 billion in total federal program spending that goes through the federal government system and come into our agencies every year. So in starting to wrap up this section about what the census actually is, we're encouraging everyone to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is CA Partnership. We also encourage you to sign up for our census newsletter, our resources and trainings, and census news. If you found this webinar, then you're likely already plugged in, but our URL is www.communityactionpartnership.com/census-2020. We also have a private Facebook group for community action members only, where we talk about ideas and thoughts and suggestions and answer questions about the census in a safe place where only community action but folks can be. We encourage you to join us on all of those avenues. We also have some resources. Our handouts and flyers, posters, and fact sheets can all be found on our website. We also have a blog, and all of our new e-newsletters go onto that blog. So you can find older postings if you've missed any of our e-newsletters. They're all archived there in one way or another. And we also have our Census Counts 2020 Coalition at censuscounts.org/resources, where you can find toolkits from all of our partners in a larger coalition that we discuss in another section of this Train the Trainer. You can email questions to us, your National Partnership Census staff. My name is Lindsay Marsh, and my email address is lmarsh@communityactionpartnership.com. Lil Dupree and Lauren Martin are also both on the Census team. And for those of you who know Jim Masters and or Alan Stansbury, they're our subject matter experts on this project and can also be of assistance. With that, I thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join us for the next video.